How's it going, guys? Vaibhav here from GN Tech, and welcome to a camera comparison between the Realme 5 Pro and the Vivo S1. So I'm recording this on the front-facing cameras on both of these smartphones at 1080p resolution, and this gives you an idea of the quality that's coming out of the cameras, the dynamic range, the stabilization, and pretty much everything else. This also gives you an idea of how the cameras, or rather the smartphones, record my voice, so you can judge whether or not these two phones would be suitable for you to vlog your trips and adventures on. But I think with that, we're gonna move into the primary cameras now with some samples and then some video footage from the primary cameras. So with that being said, let's jump into the comparison. So between these two phones, there's a big difference in primary optics. While the Realme 5 Pro has a 48 megapixel quad camera setup, it's a triple camera 16 megapixel setup on the Vivo S1. For selfies, the S1 has a double resolution 32 megapixel sensor compared to the Realme's 16 megapixel one. To begin, we'll start with this sample, and straight away the difference between camera hardware is noticeable. The 5 Pro can capture more detail in the flower, which is something the S1 cannot do. Both phones have an AI mode, which shows some differences in color saturation, but the majority of the change comes with the 5 Pro's added color boost option, which saturates the colors in the picture. Next is this image, and at face value the S1's image looks brighter and a lot more saturated. There's some sort of sharpening going around as well, but the more natural picture comes from the 5 Pro. Another feature the 5 Pro has over the S1 is its macro mode. So with this, the 5 Pro is able to take close-up images of subjects, which is something that the S1 cannot do. So it's something you should keep in mind for sure. And back to this simple image, I threw this one in to highlight the color differences between the lenses, but also the differences in dynamic range. It's clear that the 5 Pro can capture more of the background because of its better processing compared to the Vivo S1. But here in rather a complex situation, both phones are actually doing pretty well. I think in this case I prefer the Vivo S1's image, but that being said, some of the subject's detailing is muted on the S1. And to be honest, if you look at both photos side by side, the S1's image just looks a tad bit better, so I'd go for that one in this case. As close as the previous combination of images was in terms of colors, this next one, there's a visible difference, but I took this image more to compare the 5 Pro's dedicated 48 megapixel mode. When looking at these images side by side, there isn't a big difference, but I zoomed into these images at about the same, and to be honest, there isn't a huge difference either, but it's a feature worth pointing out on the Realme 5 Pro, and it's something that the Vivo S1 does not have. This sample is to highlight both phones' ultra-wide-angle lenses. In terms of coverage, the S1 does have a wider field of view compared to the Realme 5 Pro, and the image just looks a lot sharper. Some of this does look artificial compared to the 5 Pro, but the 5 Pro's lens has this greenish tinge to the colors, which you don't find on the Vivo S1. While neither phone has any optical zoom, I thought it would be worth comparing the extent to which both of these phones perform. So this is at 1x zoom and now this is at 2x zoom, where straight away the sharpness on the S1 stands out. This is at 5x zoom, where I think the S1's image looks better in terms of detail and noise, and this is at 10x zoom. While the 5 Pro has a lot of artifacting going on, at least the S1 doesn't have any of that. Speaking of optical lenses, let's also talk about portraits. So this is a portrait with a complex subject, and I think both phones are doing relatively well. The S1's image is slightly overexposed, but aside from that, it's hard to pick a clear winner between these two samples. But with portraits of people, the differences are more obvious, and here certainly the Realme 5 Pro is better both with edge detection and dynamic range. Flipping to selfies, one clear change is the difference in colors. The Vivo S1 for some reason enhances colors, which lead to a reduction in detail, and its dynamic range is not that much better. However, with portraits, it seems to me that the high resolution sensor on the Vivo S1 shines, with it capturing more detail than the 5 Pro. I think between these though, the choice really is down to personal preference. With that, we can move to nighttime photos. Unfortunately, the Vivo S1 does not have a dedicated night mode, and its lens without it is fairly poor. With the 5 Pro's added night mode, the differences are pretty substantial, favoring the quality of the 5 Pro's images by far. That stays true both in relatively well-lit conditions at night and also in extremely dark conditions. I think Vivo should definitely look at adding a night mode to its cameras, even at this price point. As for selfies, neither phone performs exceptionally well. And to be honest, you would be better off avoiding using the selfie cameras in these situations, but if you were to, maybe the 5 Pro would be the better choice. With that, let's move to video footage starting with 1080p. From the S1, it's clear that the video is over-sharpened while the 5 Pro has this green hue to its video. Detail-wise, the sharpening makes the S1's footage look better, but in terms of stabilization, the 5 Pro is much better. This is sample footage with both phones' ultra-wide-angle lenses, where the situation is more of the same, although you can see that the S1 has the wider field of view, but extremely sharpened footage. This sample is now comparing 1080p 60fps footage from the 5 Pro versus 1080p 30fps footage from the S1 because that's the highest it can do, where quite honestly, the extra frame rate is not too visible from the 5 Pro. And lastly, this is looking at 4K video from the 5 Pro compared to 1080p on the S1. The S1 cannot film 4K video, but at least with this, you can judge the extent of the differences between both footage samples. Lastly, we've got this night sample where again, in terms of both quality and stabilization, the 5 Pro is doing the much better job. So that wraps up this comparison. Let us know what phone you prefer down in the comments and make sure to like and subscribe for more videos in the future. Thanks for watching, this was Vaibhav and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.